I made it through once, and I'll say it again when we get to it. I hope these movies get a little bit shorter, but I'm not hopeful.
Yeah, man. Welcome to the age of the 3 to 4 hour movie. No, I genuinely don't know how long most of these movies get. Hello and welcome to Potato Chip Pictures. We are looking at From Russia with Love this week. I, of course, am B. Sammy Davis, joined by...
Justin, nice to see you.
Yeah, except we can't see each other or the audience. It's an audio medium, but that's okay. That's neither here nor there.
I mean, it's fun.
Before we get into talking about what happened in the movie, I don't want to give our ratings yet, but I do want to say I like this movie a whole lot more than Dr. No.
I won't give my rating, but that's a take.
Ooh. Ooh, we're starting spicy. Well, let's introduce the movie. This is the second movie in the Bond franchise. I failed to say this on our first recording, but Dr. No was the 6th book from Ian Fleming.
Oh.
This is the 5th book, number 5.
Interesting.
So we've got a movie that is a direct sequel, but the source material came first. Before the other.
That's good to know. I mean, we're not diving in too deep into the history, but that's interesting. Maybe they picked the funnest one for the first one. I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean, that first one was interesting, but I might come around to your take. It's
I think the first one is okay, and I feel like if you love the Bond films, you're probably going to be fine with Dr. No, mostly as a relic of the past. Whereas I do think From Russia with Love, which had double the budget from the previous movie and came out the very next year, I think they made a legitimate Bond movie. I think this is where I would start a newbie. I would say, all right, well, let's skip the first one and go straight to From Russia with Love. Personally.
I mean, it's been a bit for Dr. No. It was a nice, prototype of a nice spy movie. I think that's what I appreciated of it was the tension and the pacing and the feel of, there's a mystery, but it's also a mystery to me. Partway through this one, I'm like, what's the motivation? What's going on? I think I'm a little lost because what is going on?
I've got to be honest. I watched this movie 3 times this week. The first time I sat down and I watched it, but I didn't take any notes. I was just sitting down and watching it, and that was my first reaction.
Okay.
I have seen this movie before, but I had forgotten most of it. And so sitting down the first time, I was just like, what is happening? Why are we doing any of this?
Exactly. This is a trap, but a trap to do what? It came around at the end, but man, it was hidden for a bit for me because I'm like, it just doesn't, I don't know, the setup is so focused on the villains that it didn't land for me that something, their motive was disclosed. Let's get James Bond. I'm like, cool. Hold on. You've had 8 chances to get him now. Get him to do what?
Yeah. Well, let's dive right into it. And before we get totally started, because of the success of Dr. No, the production team of Broccoli and Saltzman, Albert R. Broccoli and Harry Saltzman, they had committed to making a movie per year. And they did this for a while. So they had some strong feedback from audiences, but they also got some strong dollar returns from audiences. So they kind of decided we're in it all the way. And this one came out the very next year, and the next one will come out the year after that, and same with the one after that. Then we get a 2-year break. But for the first 4 movies, we're just hitting them one after another. You get 1 year of rest.
See, I feel like that helps explain a bit of if James Bond was the first introduced from Dr. No. It's like, well, why did this spawn such a franchise? And it's like, oh, well, if you hit people with a movie and movie and movie and movie,
Mm-hmm.
like Lord of the Rings, that was December, I think.
I think
It has cultural staying power, so that makes more sense.
And then you contrast that with another mega franchise like Star Wars. And I'll be honest, I think part of the reason that fans start to turn on the franchise is because they have longer to sit with every movie before the next one comes out. You know, they had 2 years between The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. And it only took a few months for them to be like, wait, we just watched A New Hope again. And then you've got a whole year of this poison in your well. And then you're going to try to put out the next movie and hope that it hits just as well. So I think I agree with you that, you know, doing it year after year puts it into the zeitgeist.
Yeah. Well, let's start because the intro, I think, seemed the same, but I didn't go back and compare. What did you think?
I think it's the same. I also did not
Okay.
go back and compare, but watching it, I was like, that looks like the same guy. That looks like the same quality of picture. I'm pretty sure whether it's Sean Connery or not, I did not look that up from last episode, but this is, I think this is the same footage.
Yeah, I feel like they must have definitely gotten feedback from the audience of, what was your intro doing? We would like to see something mysterious and overly sexy. I'm like, it's one of those other ones of, I don't know where this is coming from, but I will say that if that was a practical effect of the names on, like, fading in and out of focus, I'm like, that seems like it could be practical.
That was a practical effect.
Kind of cool.
Yeah. But before we get to the opening credits, there was a scene that we had to watch first. And I love that scene. That's why I am making sure that we talk about it.
I saw intro in my notes and I was like, oh yeah, that intro. Yeah, let's go to that one because it has a cool piece in it.
So I was curious during my second watching and I was looking up trivia, so I can tell you this with certainty. This is the only time in the movie we are going to see Sean Connery wearing a tuxedo or a dinner suit. He usually wears one in every single Bond movie, but it's not James Bond wearing this particular one. We see Sean Connery being hunted by this very blonde man.
Yeah. Who keeps whistling and making noises for him to know where he is. It didn't make any sense.
Yeah, he's like, I'm over here now. Like, he picks up a stick just to break it so that Bond will turn around and know where he is. But I guess he's moved on from there.
Until the reveal. I think it was interesting to see they have gadgets on the evil side too. And then once he strangles out Bond, I'm like, oh, in this second movie of the franchise, we start having these very lifelike masks. I'm like, okay, that's why it's a thing. I only was introduced to that in the first Tom Cruise Mission Impossible. Like, right?
Yeah, I thought it was a Mission Impossible thing to have
exactly
very lifelike masks.
So I was like, oh, yeah, it was interesting to see that. And I'd be curious if Mission Impossible did it or if they just lifted it.
Yeah, I don't know the timeline because I know the Mission Impossible series came first, and I don't know if that was 60s or 70s. And I also don't know enough about the series to know if they did rubber masks. It was a spy show with a lot of
Yeah.
gadgets and a lot of fun stuff. Uh, I just don't know if they did masks. I never watched the original series, but I did get pretty into the first few Mission Impossible movies.
Oh yeah.
I'm a
They're
sucker
good.
for a spy. I
Oh
like
yeah.
spy movies. But then when we finally see, we didn't actually kill Bond in the opening sequence, we do go to the credits, and unlike Dr. No, we have a single song for the entirety of it. And then you also brought up, we also have our first instance of a female figure kind of
Yeah.
being the main focus for the entirety of the credits. And you hit the nail on the head. They did it all in camera with projectors, and I love the effect. I love the effect.
If there were no color, it would lose something, but it was effective. If I'm like, I would like to know the credits. I'm not super keen on watching a belly dancer get gazed at. So I don't know what's the word, intently, just because like, well, I would like. There's these names on your body. Excuse me, miss.
Yes, I need to read. Well, get comfortable with it because they are only going to get more
More.
intense.
I was betting on it. I have not seen like any of the Bonds. Like this is a lot of first viewing. So
It's good to be a newbie. One of
oh
my
yeah,
favorite podcasts is Newbie Star Trek. I'm only a little bit ahead of them in terms of my personal viewing of Star Trek. And so I went into it with as much experience as they did. And I'm like, wow, this is dope. So I hope you represent our members of the audience who might have only seen these once or never. Maybe they're going to
yeah,
come in, they're going to listen to what we think and then form their own opinions, but
oh yeah.
you are their vessel.
Well, it was nice to see a familiar face and finally figure it out that the blonde villain is from The Sting, from Jaws, and probably from
Oh,
other stuff that I've never watched. But I initially thought The Dirty Dozen, but I don't think he's in that. But
but I have seen The Sting and the
yep.
original Jaws, and I did not recognize him at all.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Doyle, Lonigan. It's a very different looking character, but yeah,
That's
it was
crazy.
just familiar enough.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to watch those again to see how different his character is because he's not one of my favorite henchmen in the franchise, but on the third viewing, it finally started to click for me. I was like, he's a very capable assassin. He is
Oh yeah.
a fantastic foil to Bond. He's a great rival, a great villain. He's just so forgettable because he doesn't have a
Yeah.
gimmick beyond being blonde.
And he doesn't. I don't know that he has very many lines until he's impersonating later down the plot.
Yep, that is the only time he speaks. We don't know what his natural speaking voice sounds like. We don't know how he thinks. he
If you go
acts
watch
like
this thing,
someone else.
if you go back to this thing, I'm curious if he maybe couldn't really do an accent, and he when he assumes the identity, he just goes straight to what's comfortable instead of trying to make what the I don't know what the main villain lady's name is. Number 3,
Number 3, that is Kleb, Colonel
Kleb,
Kleb.
right? Kleb.
And
Well,
what's fascinating about her, I don't want to say that. Let's go to our
Move on.
first villain because
Yeah.
once the credits end, we're still not going to look at real Bond. We're going to go to a chess match. And
Yeah.
this dude cheats. At least if we were looking at modern day rules. He has a note passed to him. He reads it in front of everyone, tears it up so no one else can see it, and no one cares.
I mean, I felt like it was passed mostly inconspicuously as like the coaster, but then yeah, I'm like, you just crumple it up, or I don't know, leave it there. It was
He could have just read it and kept it as
yeah,
a coaster, and then when he's
yeah,
leaving, he could pull it out and take it with him. But, if it were modern day, he would be ejected from the tournament. But he's so good at chess that once he reads his note that says he is being summoned, he ends the game in one move.
yeah. He's that good.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
well, probably could have seen it beforehand and gotten there ready. But then he goes to the main villain. I mean, the Thanos of James Bond, I assume.
Yep,
He's
number
got,
one. We don't know his name. We don't know his face. We
he's
only
got a
know
very
he
pretty
is the
cat.
top. Oh yeah, it's a great
Yeah.
cat. And this, of course, is the inspiration for Inspector Gadget's claw.
Oh,
I'll
because
get you, Gadget.
you never see him, right?
We
I was gonna
will
say, it's
see
like the
number
cat.
one eventually. But at least in this movie, and maybe for the next whatever, I don't know enough trivia to know when we're going to meet number one and see his face and learn his name. But right now, we have a boss for Spectre, and he's a mystery. And that it's a very interesting choice. Because what if there was not a sequel? What if this movie bombed? And then we never know who was number one.
Yeah, that would be unfortunate. I think I wrote it down saying, well, they get to start off the MacGuffin chase and say, we need this thing. Don't necessarily have to be too descriptive of what it does, but
It is the
yeah.
Lecter. I even
Lecter.
remember what it was, but that's because I watched the movie 3 times this week.
I don't know if you want to say anything about that meeting in particular, because my next thing is
I do have one thing I want to say, and that
Yeah.
is, I think that little note that says no animals were harmed in the making of this picture didn't come into effect until like the 80s or 90s. So those beta
those
fish
fish-
were
oh, yeah.
really killed right on camera.
they looked really dead. Yeah. They were unhappy. Yeah.
But this scene is immensely important because it tells us that everything that happens is number 5's plan. And he does lay it out. He says, we are going to steal this decoding device called a Lecter from the Russians. We're going to use the British to do it, but then we're going to steal it back from the British and sell it back to the Russians. I don't know if they were actually going to follow through all the way to the end, but that is the plan that he sets out. And he says, in order to do this plan, we're going to need one loyal Russian girl who works in the Istanbul embassy. And then because we're going to make it so obvious that it's a trap, the Brits are just going to do it. And they're going to obviously send Bond because number 5 is a genius.
I mean, and I could not remember that for the life of me, that they wanted that, like, but he had it, and like it felt like he had it for so long once he eventually gets it.
Yeah, and when we get to that part, I'll tell you why it clicked for me, but before we get to that part, we still are not meeting Bond yet.
We have to go look around. Was that after the they look around at the mansion and we meet the blonde guy?
Kleb gives him a punch in the gut. I do want to say, so we go through Spectre's training grounds, and what caught my eye every time I watch the movie is that Spectre really loves to hire bald and mustachioed men. Those are their favorites.
I didn't much catch that in the background. I was noticing how difficult it must have been to to film all of that happening, all the training and fire, and then go back and dub all of the speaking parts because, man, the dubbing is a little rough. Like,
yes, this is early days of dubbing.
Yeah.
I mean, not necessarily early days. We just don't have computers. And so everything has to be perfect, and it has to be done on magnetic tape.
Yeah.
So I get why it's a little clunky.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that fire effect with the flamethrower, every time I watch it, I'm like, they are shooting fire at a stuntman.
Yeah.
He just has to run across the stage.
Did a great job of it there.
Yeah.
Stunts are pretty great.
So yeah, we get Kleb meeting the assassin. His name is Grant. Donald Grant is what I have in my notes. I only mention that because we're only going to hear his name one more time, and that's towards the end of the movie. But Grant is the near naked man who assassinated Near Bond, and he has now been recruited into Number Five's plan, and he will answer directly to Number Three. And so we've got this weird hierarchy of villains, because in most Bond movies you've got the villain, the henchmen, and the lackeys. The henchmen are the muscles, the lackeys are the ones who get the job done, and the villain is the guy in charge. And in this movie, we see the villain once, and we're moving over to the lackeys, but Kleb kind of takes the role of the villain from that point on, and Grant is her henchman. So I find that interesting.
I guess that kind of comes into play at the very, 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 very end.
We're jumping all over this movie.
Well, sure. I mean, I won't speak to it till we get there. But it was like, oh yeah, okay, yeah. Resolve Kleb being the villain in this. So that was fun. I'm like, there's how many minutes left in this, and okay. We got to wrap this up.
Yeah, it does feel that way. But, and I think it feels that way partly because this beginning is so drawn out. Because after meeting Kleb and Grant, we still don't get to meet Bond. We need to meet Tatiana and have a very uncomfortable scene between Kleb and Tatiana.
Yeah. It's like, okay. This is
I mean, there is some serious HR violations going on during this interview.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting to see the surefire way to keep a person loyal to your plan is to say, well, if you don't go through with it, we'll just kill you in this room. It's like, okay, so the choice is to take it to not die, and then they're gonna stick with your plan. Like, what do you expect this person to do? Like,
for real. And I mean, you just answered one of my notes that I have for the very end of the movie, and I'll bring it up when we get there. But yeah, like, there is no reason for her to be loyal to Kleb except that she has heard of her, and now Kleb is threatening her, like, do this mission or die. Like, I don't know if Number 5 has an eventuality for what if she says no and has to get killed. Is there a backup?
No, it's got to be this one. She's
That's
the prettiest person we can find.
Yeah.
He's a genius, though. So, I mean, he must have had just plenty of people to choose from and was like, yeah, we'll pick this lady.
She's the one that'll get Bond. At least seduced.
I'm trying to remember how it transitions, because I wrote down that the music transitions from that scene to finally Bond.
Yep, finally Bond. River. And I will comment about this music because we hear it twice during the runtime of this movie. Mm-hmm. We finally have a pop song that sings From Russia with Love. It's happened.
Must have been a great tie-in. Like, yeah, we'll get that on the radio. I mean, that's like when you said the making a movie every year. It's interesting to try and piece together what sort of cultural limitations made it necessary and possible to be like, oh, we need a song that people can hear on the radio, and then before or after they go to this movie. Mm-hmm. Here you go.
Likely before, but I'm just basing that on Footloose because the song Footloose came out like 2 months before the movie and was a mega hit. And then the movie came out and it was a mega hit. So in my head, that's how all of them do it.
in terms of you hear this on the way to the movie or you hear this after you've seen the movie, and it's a connection of your memory into something that you'll retain.
Yeah, you'll remember the title better.
Yes, the song would have to have come out before the movie.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I haven't taken the time to look it up because I don't like the song.
I mean, from what I heard of it, I'm like, this sounds like a polka song, like dancing or something.
Yeah,
like,
it's lounge music. It's a crooner.
What you call it? The one guy, Lawrence Welk, that's the show. It's like like very light lounge music.
Mm-hmm. And it's my... Well, I haven't heard all of them yet, but so far, in terms of what I can remember, this is my least favorite Bond song, and I am very glad they didn't put it over the opening credits, because I think it would have sunk the movie. Like, it's just such a dull song, but it works in the little bits that we get, and I just wanted to point it out because, hey, we've got a song with the title in the lyrics, and that's awesome. And we also, again, because this is a direct sequel, we see the same British woman who was at the beginning of Dr. No. Yeah, she is back, and Bond breaks her arm. At least if you listen to the sound effect when he slaps her hand away, they put something in that sounded like breaking wood.
Ooh.
Like, obviously she's not too hurt by it, but man, every time I see the slap and hear the sound, I'm like, dude, you're gonna hurt that woman.
Is that before or after the pager went off?
This is after the pager. So they're on the boat, pager goes off, he talks to Moneypenny, and he tries to pretend he's looking over an old case, and then she gets all feisty with him, and so, you know, to show that he's the one in charge.
Oh yeah,
that's when he's got to smack her.
Well, I was half expecting, since it was off screen, for it to be like a shoe phone. Be like, oh, that's where.
Man, that would be great.
Get Smart got it from.
Yeah. But we do head over to MI6, and we get our first appearance ever of Q. The last movie, it was an armorer. I think I misspoke and said it was the Q branch. But if it's Q branch, it's not mentioned in the movie. But here we get to meet the actor who's going to do it till he dies.
Yeah. I was like, oh, I recognize you as a younger man. You're adorable.
Yeah, like in the history of this franchise, we have had 3 Qs. And I think we've had 2 M's and maybe 2 Moneypennies. But this Q is going to go all the way into the 90s. He is going to be the image of tech for all of these movies for a long, long time. And we get one of the few pieces of tech where everything that is shown gets used in the movie.
I mean, I think the later ones might also, like...
Yeah, I think when we get to GoldenEye and he has his laser watch, he uses the laser watch. And
well, like Daniel Craig era, I think like he only gets 2 gadgets, so it's like, well, I think he uses all of them in that one, but these intervening ones, I'm suspecting that he won't use all of them.
And I could be speaking out of turn. I just have it in my head that he gets like some cars where they tell him all these things that they do, but we only see half of them happening. Whereas this briefcase, we're going to see everything that it can do. And
felt a little like a setup. I thought it was going to be some sort of like, oh, I don't know what these gold sovereigns mean in this time period. Maybe like if you just need to get some lunch at some place, these are good all over the world or something like that. Like,
I imagine it's the same philosophy as like the John Wick movies, where it's more about gold.
Yeah.
It's if you're a criminal, it's easier to unload gold than it is to
Yeah.
unload different currencies and all this stuff. So that's my thinking on the sovereigns. But you're
Yeah.
right. Unless someone knows what they're doing, what good is a gold sovereign going to do anyone in the 20th
Yeah.
century?
Yeah, like, but where you have transactions happening anywhere, that makes a little bit of sense.
Now, when they show how to safely open the briefcase, every time I have seen that, I've always wondered, why does Bond look so nervous when he's opening it on his turn? And just in looking it up, apparently on one of the earlier takes, the production crew pranked Connery. So he opened it and something did explode in the case. And so he looks nervous because he doesn't know, did they actually stop the prank? And frankly, I think it makes for a better shot. You know, here's new tech that explodes with tear gas. I'd be a little nervous to open it up.
I mean, I was thinking, wow, the guy that made this is arming it to show him how to stay safe. Here it is armed, and then here you do it unarmed. Like, okay, well, we know that unarmed doesn't work or works the right way. Who knows?
Except it did work in one take.
Yeah.
So I do love that prank exists. I think it does add, a little quality to that one blink and you miss it moment where Bond looks nervous. But I also think it kind of captures the character. This is a guy who relies on a gun, and they're like, here's a bomb in a box.
Yeah. Just be careful with it. You'll be fine. I feel like the blink and you miss it are maybe a bit of what was difficult to pin down sometimes. Like, the fact that I didn't quite follow the motivation of Spectre and them saying, well, we want this, but we want to go about getting it in a convoluted way. So we can also get Bond to, like, he meets a guy after a car ride, and I'm like, I know you're meeting a contact, but you get really, like, there's a lot of film with this contact. What are we doing? Like,
Yes.
Is this a side quest? Like, what's going on?
We are getting to the part of the movie that I think is the weakest part of the movie. But before we get there, I do have to ask you, have you ever opened a briefcase?
Yes. Yeah.
If I have, I would have been a child. I don't know the right way to open one.
I mean, I saw one that my father had that was like a hard shell case, but you would spin the dials. I mean, it was a more modern edition than this one, but you spin the dials and you just have one button. Technically, it was a square, kind of set up in the same way. So if it were a spy case, you could make it twist and then still open, but like, it wasn't a spy suitcase. So
that's interesting, because Q just shrugs it off like, standard briefcase, everybody knows how to open it like this. And I was like, I don't know how to open it like that. I've never opened one.
Flip. I've opened one before, but I have not seen any locked briefcase in the past 20 years, I'd say.
So we are going to get into the weakest part of the movie with one of the most heartbreaking stories behind it. So I just wanted to kill the mood as quickly as possible.
I mean, I'm worried now because, like, I'm trying to guess what's going on. Go
So
ahead, spoil it.
when we get to Istanbul, we have a very similar airport scene from Doctor No. It's not the
Oh yeah,
same, and they do
it looked like
subvert
it.
some of the expectations, but it's meant to make you think like, oh, I've seen this before. I know what's going on. Except this
Oh
time, the
yeah.
driver's a good guy. Like he's
Oh yeah.
supposed to
I
be
mean,
there.
yeah.
But we do get another car following them, and Grant gets to do a little bit of murder. But all of this is in service to meeting the character Karen Bey, who is the head of the Istanbul branch of MI6, as it were. This actor is Pedro, and I'm going to mispronounce his last name, Armendáriz. Armendáriz.
Okay.
This was his last movie.
Oh.
Shortly after they started filming, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And so
no.
they were like, well, how do you want to proceed? And he said, well, I want this to be my movie. Like, now that I know that I am about to die, I absolutely need to do this movie. So all of the shooting was rearranged. And so from essentially the moment we get to Istanbul, in terms of filming, they did everything they needed to do with Pedro, Karen Bey. So all of his scenes are filmed. Then they flew him out to Los Angeles so he could do the ADR himself. And then when he went to the hospital, he didn't die of cancer. He smuggled a pistol into his hospital room because he didn't want to just waste away from cancer.
Oh.
But that kind of locks the filmmakers into using this footage, good or bad.
Yeah.
And there is some of it that is fantastic, that is great and amazing, and a lot of it that could have been cut. And most of the stuff in early Istanbul could have been cut. I like Karen Bey. I think he's a great character. I think he's a great sidekick to Bond. He's very capable. I just don't think most of his scenes were necessary.
Yeah, I mean, he was an enjoyable character. And yeah, the scenes that I'm trying to think which ones there was a bit like the first time we meet him, and then like
I think the first time we meet him, those scenes are necessary.
Yeah,
they talk about Tatiana. He reveals that they've got a periscope to just spy on the Russians. And he does it twice a day, apparently.
Like, it's a pretty insecure room with that periscope. Like, okay. I mean, that's where it's a little tough to say, well, I'm suspending my disbelief for all these other silly things that Bond is doing.
Exactly.
But you put a periscope under a building, and it's like, but how and why, and that doesn't
They make
sense.
it sound like they are able to fool the Russians into thinking that there was some kind of gas leak, and so they're able to get contractors in, and while the contractors were working, they just installed it. I imagine it being behind a wall, and there's maybe like a little mouse hole, like a cartoonish mouse hole that they're looking through. But even then, there might not have been a mouse hole before. Why didn't the Russians notice it? But like you said, we got to suspend disbelief and just accept that they can spy on the Russians twice a day. But Grant kills a Russian, and now we start what I think is a huge chunk of cuttable movie. We get to the fat. This is the part of the movie that I absolutely hate. All 3 viewings this week, it got worse and worse. And this is, of course, it starts with the bombing. Karen Bey is at his desk, and then his assistant seduces him away from the desk. But oh no, there was a bomb on the other side of the wall right at that desk, and it would have killed him. And that's why we need to go under the embassy to to see what's
See
going
why.
on. Yeah, and we meet
Yeah.
Krishenko. I wrote his name down somewhere. He's such a forgettable and awful character that I don't
One
even
of
want
his
to.
sons, right?
No,
No?
the Russian
Oh, the
assassin.
Russian.
Kr-
Oh. Yeah, I think you're right.
Krylenko.
Kalinko.
So we meet Krylenko in the Russian embassy. He's just a guy. He's not a villain. He does villainous things, but he's just a guy that lives in Istanbul and works for the Russian embassy. Like, and so we follow him for a while, and then for some reason they decide to go to the gypsy camp. They don't say why,
Yeah.
but they just
They
decide
don't
to
say
go there.
why. That was the most confusing part. I'm like,
They're
you
just
guys
there
looked
now.
at the Russians. Where are we going? Why are we going here? Wait, there's a whole other group that's plotting something, or are they your like guards? I couldn't tell whether the
Yeah.
second group was part of them or not part of them.
So they essentially say in Istanbul spycraft, you've got the Brits and the Russians, and the Brits, they use gypsies while the Russians use Bulgarians. And
And Krylenko.
yeah,
Bulgarian.
Krylenko is a Bulgarian. And the whole reason this scene exists, and this is the worst scene in the movie, they want to have a girl fight.
Oh, yep.
And there are two dancers who do a highly choreographed dance that's supposed to look like a fight. It just doesn't work for me. I hate it from start to finish. Fortunately, it doesn't last long because Krylenko makes his move and invades the gypsy camp. Why was he at the gypsy camp? He
don't
just had
know.
a spy hanging out there for some reason.
Yeah. We're ready to... Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it says it's forgettable, and we, like, don't love that part. It's like, what are my notes? They... Blood feud and... Man, the fight... I will say, the fight when they get to actually the Bulgarians attacking them. With the beta fish, this poor donkey is getting spooked out of its mind and just, like, thrashing around, like, with all of the explosions from, like, the fireworks and the gunshots. And it's
Poor
like,
animal.
oh, let him go. Like, he's just stuck there. He's not trained for this.
And it sucks that he's the most interesting part of this entire brawl. Like,
Right.
it's one of the worst fight scenes ever. Bond doesn't do much of anything. He cuts down a tent that hurts both the gypsy and the Bulgarian. Then he pushes a flaming cart into both a gypsy and a Bulgarian. Like, he helps a couple of gypsies, but he is not an active member of this brawl. And it gets to the point, and the whole reason this scene exists is someone is about to stab Bond, but there's Grant in the background, and
Yeah.
he shoots the guy dead. And
Saves him.
later on, Grant is going to suggest that was part of Number 5's plan. It was part of the plan the whole time.
We have to keep Bond alive.
Yeah, but why? Why was he with the gypsy? Why were anyone with the gypsies? It's the worst. The worst scene in the whole movie. Everything with Krylenko could be cut, and we would have just as good a movie. But like I said,
an hour and a half instead.
yeah. But we need to use the footage of Pedro as Karim Bey. We have it all. It's all locked down. It has to be used. And so that everything with Krylenko is the fat of this movie. It just doesn't add anything. And when it's finished, we're back to the main story.
Yep.
This is when we finally meet Tatiana, and this is when we start planning the heist, and the movie becomes a heist movie.
Oh, I want to go to where we meet Tatiana because it is like if we're skipping all of the Kurlenko stuff, because like I wrote down that once they finally take care of Kurlenko, he's like, "That's many debts paid." I'm like, I know nothing about those debts. Did you want to
Yeah.
explain some before we got there?
You just told
Too
me
late.
he was a murderer.
He's dead now. So
Yeah. And then, of course, Bond makes his joke about domestic abuse. Oh, she should have kept her mouth shut. From
yeah,
the wall picture.
yeah. That one's
It's a joke that doesn't age well, and
no.
it's a like just a perfect cap to a series of unnecessary scenes.
Yep. I literally wrote again. Who is this guy? Kurlenko, and why did he want to kill him for many debts? It doesn't make, it's not explained, it's not set up, and we're back to the regular plot, which is, in my opinion, the what do you call it? The book talk type stuff that's around, like the literature of our day. It's like some people will read. They call it smut. Apparently in the 1960s, men watched Bond. And it's essentially, oh, you're here in my bed or in another room, and oh, what's that? You say that your mouth is too big? Oh, this is ridiculous. Bond. Well, I was like, what? And then there's a one-way mirror on the other side of this bed? Like, this is like levels above the most ridiculous romance novels.
Well, let's talk about
print.
the hotel for a little bit, because we could cut all of Kurlenko's stuff and go from Bond going to his hotel room to getting his new bedroom, and the movie would be fine. Bond's first room, he goes into and he checks it, and there are obvious bugs. There's one that we see, and then he pulls out a device, and there's one inside the phone. And so he calls the desk and he says, "I need another phone." And he realizes that they are listening in on this call. They suggest the bridal suite, but he doesn't check that one. He doesn't check it when he comes back from killing Kurlenko. This is the same Bond as Dr. No's Bond, who just does not care about securing a room.
Yeah, I wrote that down. When he first got to the hotel, it's like, oh, is he going to fail at spycraft again? Oh, no, he actually finds the bugs, but then beyond that, he's like, well, second room should be fine. Like, it's all right.
Like, why would these people who are bugging my room and listening in on my calls put me in another bugged room? That's just impossible.
Yeah.
So we do get a near naked woman. I mean, it is a naked woman. It's carefully shot in a way where you don't see anything. I learned that is not the actress who plays Tatiana. It's the character of Tatiana, but that was like a body double. That the actress did not even want to do that. They did make her be topless under the bed, and she jokes about how Sean Connery was trying to pull the blankets off.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, like, talk about a different time.
Yeah. Oof. I mean, I didn't notice when the body double happened. I was thinking you were saying that there was a different actress during, like, when she was talking to him, and I'm like, but she seemed like the same person, but I understand now. Okay.
Yeah. So apparently, at least in the early 60s, real life Sean Connery was just as rapey as James Bond in the movies. So I guess he embodies that character.
Yeah. What was it? Oh, yeah. So after they get out of the hotel, like, she's like, oh, I'll tell you about it tomorrow. Mm-hmm. But then she has, like, there's this whole scene in
the cathedral.
A cathedral, that's the word. I was where she's trying to set down a package, and I was confused, thinking, well, that's obviously for Bond, right? weren't you guys in the same hotel room?
Yeah.
Why are
Well,
we going out?
I missed it on my first time. I can only say this because I watched the movie 3 times this week. uh, During that awkward scene in the hotel room, Bond suggests we will go to the cathedral as tourists, and you can leave the floor plans for inside the embassy. We are now fully in a heist movie, and that did not click for me until the third viewing. Once it did click, I was like, "Oh, this is a movie where Bond thinks he is the one who is planning and fulfilling on this heist, but there is a layer deeper where someone else has actually planned this heist." And so, Bond's portion of the heist, when it's finished, the movie's going to become a getaway movie where the real heisters are trying to get to him so they can steal back the Lecter.
Yeah.
But it only clicked for me on the third viewing, where I definitely heard them talk about their plans to meet in the cathedral. And unlike Dr. No, Bond doesn't get a chance to kill the guy.
Which guy? Wait.
So
yeah.
we get to the
In the
cathedral, and there is a Russian spy tailing Tatiana. But it's okay because Grant's going to come in there and kill him, our blonde assassin from Spectre. He's going to do the job. And they'll talk about it in the next scene where Bond's like, "Oh, I didn't get a chance to kill him." And he seems a little butthurt about it. But, they've got what they need. They've got the map of the inside. It mostly matches the map of the original architectural design of the building. So they're ready to do their heist. And I didn't start to love this movie until I understood it was a heist. And then nearly everything started to click for me. So I'm going to go into a little bit of detail about the heist. You can stop me whenever there are things you want to comment on.
Where are you starting?
So we're going to start actually with the driving up to the Russian embassy. I think we can skip Karen Bay's discussion about the heist. I don't know if there's any other scenes between the cathedral. Oh, there is one other scene that we should.
They're on a ferry or something.
Yes, that is a pretty crucial scene because they have invented Wi-Fi over radio. It's incredible. Bond pulls out this camera. He opens it up to reveal that it's this high-tech machine on the inside. And MI6 in Britain is getting all of this live. They are hearing the conversation happening at that moment.
I didn't quite catch that it was at that moment because I was thinking
maybe
in terms of that type of actual technology era. But it makes sense that they could make that movie magic happen and say this is happening right now. I just thought it was hilarious that M was getting roasted about some sort of Tokyo women.
Yeah, what was M doing in the early days?
It killed me because I'm like, oh, this is all the people in his office, and he's like, all right, we're done. Like we don't have to listen to the rest of that.
Moneypenny, please leave.
Yeah.
I did love that she goes out and immediately starts listening again. And he knows that she's listening, so he's like, "Miss Moneypenny, as you are no doubt listening, will you please send this wire to Bond?" It's a good bit of flavor. I do love the ferry scene, and it's very possible that this was something, where he recorded it on tape, and then it was mailed over to MI6, and it's just the way they cut it that it looks like they're listening live.
In the same time.
Yeah. But the little kid in me wants to believe that MI6 is so advanced that they can listen in real time.
You got it.
So I think that's why I've always interpreted it that way.
Yeah.
So now let's get to the heist. Now let's go to the Russian embassy. And if you notice in the background, there is a large crowd of people staring towards the embassy. And for the next 2 or 3, I think there's only 2 of them, but anytime they tried to film outdoors in Istanbul, everybody would just show up and they would just they just wanted to watch. They had never seen a film company shooting in Istanbul before, so everybody wanted to be a part of it. And so for a lot of the scenes that are outdoors, they're kind of quick cuts because they don't want you to notice how many people are just standing around in the background.
Yeah.
And so I caught that on the third viewing where I was like, whoa, that's a lot of people.
I'll have to watch in the next movies, see how they handle it, because I'm sure it only got more popular.
Yeah, I mean, eventually they have to rope off parts of the street, and that has become commonplace for most film productions, except for like the indiest of indie movies. But they didn't do that back in the 60s. So it's possible that we are going to see maybe fewer on-location shoots, or if we do go on location, we will continue to see gawking crowds that just want to see what's happening.
Yeah.
But yes, we go into the embassy, and Bond says, "Excuse me, is this clock correct?" And the guy's like, "Russian clocks are always correct." And then just to make sure that guy will always remember Bond's face, he comes back and asks the same question.
Me cement that spy face into your... I mean, yeah.
So he's not the best at spycraft.
Yeah, I was wondering with the guy underground with the giant, bomb lever, wondering for a second, like, well, what is he going to do? And then there's a giant explosion. An explosion
explosion.
Makes a fissure in the floor and stuff on fire. And I'm like, this is a distraction?
There's stuff flying everywhere.
Yeah.
And
it's easy enough to go get the Lecter and bring it out. But we bring it out through the hole that is perfectly blasted to step down into wherever this guy was.
Now,
but the guy
before we step into the hole, I do want to point out that Bond puts on a gas mask because there's tear gas in the room. And he runs into the room. Tatiana coughs a couple of times. He gives her his gas mask and says, "Don't worry, it's only tear gas." Because I guess tear gas, you only need a couple of breaths of fresh air, and then it won't do anything to you.
I mean, I guess. It's,
but, suspension of disbelief will go into the hole, and then we get our next awkward bit. And this is awkward for me every time I have seen it. They have a planned escape route, and they go towards that escape route, but there is an army of rats.
Yeah. But they still make it out through a different
and
direction.
Not only that, they make it out presumably the way they were planning on going out anyway.
It's like the rats were like a train. They just went through the tunnel and then they could hop through the next one.
So I think about that often, where I'm just like, why did they have... Okay, this is another sidebar. Welcome to Potato Chip Pictures. We do a lot of sidebars here. In my favorite Christmas Carol, it's the Muppet Christmas Carol, when we meet the ghost of Christmas Past and she starts flying off with Ebenezer Scrooge, there is one little tiny moment in dialogue that irks at me so hard that I think about it almost once a month. It's that locked into my brain. And that is when Scrooge looks up at the tiny puppet of the ghost of Christmas Past and he says, "Spirit?" And she looks down and says, "What?" And he looks away and says, "Nothing." And then he looks up again and says, "Spirit?" And then they do have their dialogue. And to me, that is the rat tunnel, where it's like, what was the point of that? You just wanted to use B-roll footage of rats?
I guess. Yeah. It was, yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't think I've seen that particular Christmas Carol, but it's...
Oh, it's my favorite one. That's the reason I have that locked into my brain, because I watch it every year. So
I'll have to watch it and see, because that is just like the rats.
Yes. But the heist is finished, and now, like any good heist movie, the heroes have to get away. But what makes this movie different from other heist movies is that there are another group of characters who are still in the middle of their heist. And so there is a lot more movie to go. But I do think it goes fairly quickly. The train slows down a little bit for the movie.
A little bit.
But we do need to get all of the main characters there. We meet another Russian spy. He gets on the train because he sees Tatiana. But don't worry, Karen Bay finds him and decides that he's going to keep him preoccupied. But oh no,
we see the bad
also
guy
on the train.
He's a step ahead. The plan is working perfectly.
Exactly how number 5 planned it.
Right? Exactly. It's like, he's already on the train. Like, oh, how did you guys know that train? Oh,
because it's obvious that was what number 5 planned for. And so that, that we just have to accept that number 5 is that smart that he is able to just figure this stuff out. But we get more bad spycraft. The first bad spycraft, they get to their boxcar and Bond opens the door wide open. I think we even see someone walk by, and he says, "If it's me, I'll knock 3 times." Everyone can hear that. Now everyone knows knock 3 times to get into Bond's room. Nobody's going to use that against him, but it is his first error. His second one is what almost kills him.
Which one?
So, and I am moving faster than the movie, so I apologize.
I recall that one.
So obviously, well, not obviously, Grant is somehow able to kill both the Russian and Karen Bay, so that's a wrap on Karen Bay. Again, love the character. Just wish we could have cut all of the Krylenko stuff, but that had so much Karen Bay that it was just locked in. And it's a tragedy that the guy was dying when they made the movie, but I still love him. I do love the character. I do love how the actor portrayed him. The more I watch it, the more I become a fan of Karen Bay. So I will say that. So I was sad when he was finally murdered.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. The whole bits with him talking with the Russian spy who's on an assignment to, I don't know, like, that's where I'm like,
the airports and stations. That's his assignment. Watch the movie 3 times this week.
Well, Tatiana. Mm-hmm. Like, is she actually fallen for Bond? Like 100%? Like, actually? Because it reminds me of the later Bonds, like the Casino Royale with Daniel Craig, where that's kind of the idea of another spy. Mm-hmm. She's not trying to fall for him, but she does. It never really comes across as genuine.
Yes, I agree mostly. With you 100%.
Okay.
She's our second biggest weakness in the film. I think we're supposed to believe that at this point she has fully turned and is on Bond's side, but we don't have any reason to believe this. And neither does Bond, because when Karen Bay dies, he goes to beat on Tatiana for a little bit.
Yeah.
Now act as though nothing happened. That's a good woman. It's so terrible.
Like, before he gets to all that, he comes back into the room, and there are so many train cuts is a little maddening.
Yes.
But the one cut feels like, oh, he's coming back into, and she's all like wanting something to happen, and it's a fade to black, again harkening back to my comparison to modern day romance novels.
Yeah, we're not gonna say what happened.
Yeah, but the cut filler is his train wheel going. It's like,
you see how the train shaft keeps pumping back and forth.
Like, oh my god, please stop. Like, let's finish this heist movie.
Oh man. And we do spend probably a little too long on the train. Karen Bay had this plan that they were going to stop the train where his sons were parked. They were going to drive off and get away, but Karen Bay is killed and the train keeps going. And so when it does eventually stop, one of his children is there, and they do their second sin of bad spycraft, where they very loudly say their code phrase that they use throughout the movie of, got a match? I prefer a lighter. Oh, better still, until they go wrong. Like, they say it every single time. And this time they say it right next to the open windows of the train so that Grant can hear not only the whole plan, but
bad
also
spies.
the password.
It's just horrible spies. Oh.
Yeah. Like, the best spy in this entire picture is Donald Grant, the assassin.
Keeps his mouth shut. He just does the job.
Yeah. Like, it's not until we get to his end that he makes mistakes, because he is able to intercept Bond's contact, presumably strangle him to death, and then come back impersonating him and calling Bond old man the whole time. And if you have been listening from the beginning, this is where Donald Grant finally gets to speak.
I would like to compare his speech with The Sting or any other one, just to see if he did put on any sort of English accent because he was impersonating another English person, or if that's just how he has to speak, and so he didn't speak through the whole beginning. Maybe it has something to do with that. We'll see.
Yeah, I also need to see him in other movies to see how different it is, because he doesn't play a convincing Brit. He's not supposed to. He is Spectre. He gets the wrong wines. He obviously drugs Tatiana. And on every viewing, I see that it is clear that Bond is watching him do it. Like, they make it a point that Bond, everything that he does, Bond is noticing.
I wasn't sure because I was kind of watching it a little bit sped up just to get through it.
And it is a blink and you miss a thing. Like, it's where his eye is positioned and you only see his profile. So it's one of those things where they just assume the audience is going to be paying very close attention. But, we're modern audiences, and sometimes we need it to be a bit more obvious than that if we're watching at home.
Just a little bit. A couple more cuts. Show me his face.
Yeah, something to really show that he knows the drink has been drugged. Doesn't matter, because very soon after, Bond is going to pull a gun on Grant and reveal that he has been watching the whole time, but doesn't matter because Bond's going to believe whatever Grant says.
It's like, nuts. You had it right, and then you just... I don't really quite understand why you gave it up. I'm like, because he had to, I assume, but...
Well, Grant says, my escape route is only for one. So who do you want, the girl or the Lecter? And Bond's like, well, this whole job is for the Lecter, so I guess the girl's going to stay. That is the in-universe plot reasoning for why Bond puts his gun away and gets down on his knees to look at Grant's map. And then, of course, Grant pulls out his ankle pistol, the one he keeps tucked in his sock, and uses it to find the universal off switch. Just hit someone on the back of the head, and they'll go to sleep. Just like that.
break the whatever, C1, C2. You'll be fine.
Yeah, they'll wake up, they'll shake it off. And this, I get it. We are in a movie, and so villains have to fail. But this was the mistake. This was the mistake that Grant made. He's got Bond knocked out on his back on the floor. He could have put a bullet in him and ended it. And if this were number five's real plan, that is what would have happened, and Spectre would have won the day. But we've got a homicidal maniac, as we were introduced to him towards the beginning of the movie. And so he wants to torture Bond. So he'll wake him back up, a couple of slaps in the cheek to be like, hey, man, wake up so I can tell you about how I'm going to kill you. And then he reveals all of the plan. And he's like, I was the one who saved you in the gypsy camp, that totally necessary gypsy camp. And it's so I will accept that for the purposes of the story, the villain has to lose and he has to make a mistake. But that is the mistake. And it leads to one of the most brutal fight scenes in any Bond movie, because the camera is so tight, and it is long. And for almost every shot, it's both of the actors, grappling with each other. Even when Bond has Grant in a headlock, there's one point where Grant has to get the upper hand and push Bond away. And so we see him in the headlock. That's his face right there under Sean Connery's arm. And I don't think we would see that in modern movies, even from actors doing their own stunts. I think they would be keyed in over a stuntman's face or something.
Yeah, it's possible.
But it is a brutal fight. I like it a lot. We get to see every usage of the briefcase here, because Bond's like, hey, let me buy a cigarette. There are 50 gold sovereigns in my suitcase. He opens up one safely and gives him the 50 sovereigns. And then he's like, well, let me grab you the other 50. And the guy's like, no, I'm going to grab it. And he doesn't know how to open it. So the tear gas gets to explode.
I was really confused. I was like, are there two suitcases? There must be
because
two suitcases.
The second agent, the one who met, one who was supposed to meet with Bond, came with a briefcase. And they do, when they're outside for the silent dialogue where they do the same dialogue that they've repeated over and over. Oh man, I can't believe I skipped over that. So
it's fine.
The entirety of Grant being the best spy in this whole movie is a mostly silent scene where you're just hearing background crowd noises and train noises, and you just see their lips moving, but you don't get to hear any of the dialogue because we don't know what Grant sounds like yet. And during that, they pan down on Grant to show that he's holding one of these briefcases. Then they come back to Bond, who has spotted the briefcase, and that starts them talking to each other. So, yes.
That's where it came from. I was really confused. So then he triggers it. Fight scene.
And then Grant gets his gadget. He pulls out his wires to finally strangle Bond to death. But Bond finds the last gadget from this briefcase, the throwing knife. And he's able to get it unlatched from the briefcase, stab Grant in the arm, flip around to get the wire on Grant's neck. And rather than fight to, get to the wire, Grant is so concerned with that knife. Like, he dies trying to get the knife out of his arm. And every time I see it, I'm always like, you really don't care that you are being strangled right now.
It's just, I don't know. Must have been more painful. I don't know what's more painful than dying, though. A knife in the arm, I guess.
But I like it. It's a fantastic death for a villain that grew on me. If we had recorded this yesterday, before I watched it a third time, I would have said Grant was one of the worst villains in all of Bond. But on my third viewing, when I finally saw that the best spy in the movie was Grant.
It's him.
Then I was like, you know what? Maybe he's a pretty good villain after all. But that's the end of him. We're back to just nameless henchmen. Bond gets off the train. He intercepts what is supposed to be Grant's ride, a guy in a flower truck.
Oh yeah.
Who calls Grant's name, and that is the last time we're going to hear his name. So we heard it at the very beginning, and now from his ride. But, you know, you've got potato chip pictures here to tell you his name over and over again for the whole episode. But the very next scene is a helicopter chase scene.
Yeah.
That could also have been cut.
Yeah. I think the only thing it cements is the fact that he could take a really good skill shot and make the grenade explode in the helicopter. And then, but like that is so cuttable. They could have continued on to the very necessary boat chase.
Yes.
Maybe we cut
very
that
necessary thing. I will say about the helicopter thing, and this is part of my research this week. I learned that all of that was done in camera until we get to the end where they're at the truck and it's an obvious green screen. But that was Sean Connery dodging a stunt pilot. So there was an actual helicopter flying that close to the ground with an actual Sean Connery jumping out of the way. So that's
seemed like
that's a pretty cool idea.
Yeah.
Still a cuttable scene, but a pretty cool piece of trivia.
I mean, I can't wonder how many times they have a quota for Bond, like getting physically out of the way of stuff. Maybe they have to bring
now
that.
Dodge this. Now dodge that. That's how the British make their movies.
They were using the truck to get to the boat, helicopters with the truck, bombing them with grenades.
And
they
the Grenadier.
The helicopter. Yeah.
The Grenadier, even though he dies, don't worry, he'll show up on a boat very soon.
Oh.
There's only limited numbers of stuntmen in the world.
I guess. Yeah. there he is. Oh, man.
I mean, it's supposed to be a different character, and it's only because I watched the movie 3 times this week that I noticed that it is that stunt actor in the boat.
It kind of, I don't know. I feel like the helicopter guys didn't do as good a job as the boat guys is saying, we're not trying to kill him. Just try to stop him. And it's like, you're throwing explosives at them.
Spectre failed so hard here. Now, before we get to the boat, there is a quick Spectre scene that is pretty dope.
Oh.
We got to remember that number 1 is in charge.
Oh,
so
that's
number
between
3,
them. I did not remember that.
Yeah, it is a very quick. It probably didn't need to be there, but they directly mention all the dead people from the train. They don't mention the helicopter, so the helicopter scene still could have been cut.
Yeah.
But yeah, they before they get on the boat, well, I guess they're on the boat. Before the boat is finished, we got to cut back to the Spectre boat where number 3, Colonel Klebb, and number 5, the chess player who I can never remember the name of, are being lectured by number 1 about how we do not tolerate failure. And so the guy who is eventually going to be on the boat comes out and uses a little shoe dagger, and we deceptively think that number 3 is going to be killed, but no, it's number 5.
Oh, yeah. I was very much expecting 3 to get grabbed by the henchman. I was kind of hoping the henchman was like someone I knew from future Bond movies, but just an average one.
So similar to the actor who is eventually going to become the head of the Russian spy intelligence, the KGB.
Yeah.
So I don't know when that happens, and I definitely don't know if it's the same actor, but every time I watch the movie, that bald guy who is just a henchman, I'm always like, is that the same actor who's eventually going to be the head of the KGB. Like that guy shows up in multiple movies. He's the opposite of M. And he looks so much like this nameless henchman who's about to get on a boat.
Well,
for our next very pivotal, very important chase scene.
oh man. I mean, that poison boot may have been the only necessary thing from that previous one, but you still could have introduced it in the final scene.
Mm-hmm.
Like, go ahead. Because we already know she's a villain.
Yeah, she could have said, this is Spectre's finest toxin. It kills in 12 seconds. You know, one line of dialogue and you don't need to revisit number one. But we do need to remember that there is a boss in charge of the boss of
He's
this
upset
movie.
about stuff.
Yeah.
Like most bosses.
Yep. Bosses always be mad. I don't love the boat chase, but I find it hilarious. Like it's one of those scenes where I get a chuckle out of it every time I see it because the bald dude, the bald henchman, he's the only one who speaks, and he spends most of the chase yelling at his crew to stop trying to kill Bond. You're shooting too close. And he's speaking through his speaker so Bond knows that he's safe because they don't want to kill him.
Right. It's like a bunch of amateurs. What is communication? Yeah, that was probably the most enjoyable part of the boats, because it is like, well, you've got to defeat them. You use this flammable, explosive stuff to make a barrier that they can't drive through. I assume they could, but then the boats start burning.
Yeah, I've watched it a few times, and I think this is just the incompetence of this henchman, where they start dropping the oil drums, and he's like, slow down the boats. He doesn't need to. He's just doing that because he's a coward. But he's not supposed to be a henchman. He's supposed to be a lackey. He's supposed to just be training Spectre troops, not actually getting out there and in the field, you know?
Yeah.
So I can accept that he is totally incompetent as a leader on the field. One cool little bit of trivia about the explosion with the boats, that was a one-shot take that they had to take twice. So on their first day of filming, there was a miscommunication, and so they launched the effect, and all these fireworks started going off. The oil on the water caught fire, and then all of the boats started sailing away from the fire. And so the production crew was like, what happened? And then they found out it was a rehearsal. They weren't ready for the take yet. And so they fired it too early. So I think they had to wait a day, maybe two, for the oil to clear away so they could do it again. But what we see is the second attempt at exploding boats.
Huh. Well, I mean, it was nice to see him burn. And
yeah.
The lead character gets away. They finally are done with being chased and
we finally had our getaway, right?
We have to wait till the last 240 seconds of the movie.
Yes. I mean, we are at the very end of the movie, and we're still not finished with the getaway. One cool thing to note is the chess match happened in Venice, and same with the end of the movie. That's where Bond gets away. It's just like a happy accident. I don't know if they intended it to be anything thematic or if they just needed to use Venice twice. But that's where the chess match happens. We see Venice plastered all over the signage there.
So tourism ad.
Yep. But presumably this is the closest Bond will ever be to Spectre in this movie, because Colonel Klepp is right there, ready to invade their hotel room, dressed up as an old cleaning lady, with a wig and everything. And she makes a very valiant attempt to steal the Lecter.
Yeah.
And if our Bond girl had been true to her country, they would have gotten away with it too.
I mean, that's probably the main tell of, she was not wanting to go back to a place that would threaten her if she didn't do this.
Yeah.
This mission.
So this is where my promise note comes in, where I'm just like, why did Tatiana decide to kill her boss? Like, no one's told her that Kleb is a traitor to Russia. No one has mentioned Spectre around her. Bond hasn't talked to her about it. She's ready to defect. And for some reason, when she gets the gun and has to choose between shooting Bond and Kleb, she chooses to shoot Kleb. And we're going to end the movie shortly after that. But it didn't sit right with me. I kept trying to figure out, why on earth did she betray her country? She's at the end of the mission. Here's her boss, and she turns on her. And the last time she had a sober interaction with Bond, he was accusing her of killing Karen Bay. So it's like, I've never understood why she decided to turn and go with Bond. But then you reminded me the whole reason she was on the mission is because if she didn't do it, she was going to get murdered. So maybe it's better to go with the UK as opposed to the USSR.
I was just watching a clip of the poison boot, and it is not hers. I did not realize that the shoes they were showing were the henchmen.
Interesting. What? I'm going to have to watch that again.
Because, I think they pop out of hers.
Yeah, because she's doing the kicking. But when it's the actual pop out, the slide, they could have recycled footage from our nameless henchman who was on a boat.
All right, I'm looking at it right now because the foot pulls back, but she's wearing it comes from the henchman stabs the chess player guy, but then she has the same stabby thingy.
Yep.
In her
everybody in Spectre gets to have a stabby boot.
That's interesting. I did not notice that.
Now, one last piece of trivia. This is about the actress who plays Kleb, and I really should have had her name up. I think it's Lot Lin or something like that.
Sure.
Lotta Linya, I think, is her name. Apparently, in real life, she was one of the sweetest women on set. She was this nice, soft-spoken, very friendly to everyone person, but then she played the character of Kleb, and I believe her to be evil.
She did a really good job.
Yeah,
she's a fantastic job.
She's one of the standouts. I think Pedro, the guy who played Karen Bay, he's a standout, despite having some scenes that probably should have been rewritten, but I get it. Dude was dying. They had to film what they had. So I can forgive it, and I'm still a big fan of the Karen Bay character. I think he's fantastic. I forget who played Donald Grant. Oh, Robert Shaw.
Yeah.
He's also, on the third viewing, he's a fantastic character, but it did take me multiple viewings of this movie to finally appreciate what it was going for. And so I personally think I do have to adjust my rating for that, because even though I now think this is the best launching point for the franchise, it's got a lot of weaknesses, and it takes multiple viewings to really get it.
And if you can fast forward through a little bit of it, it's a little bit better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kralenko
really
is not needed for the whole thing.
Remind me what our scoring reviews.
Let's talk about ratings. So ratings are different than grades. In a grade, 70 is the average. That is what you're aiming for to get a passing score. but 70 is not in the middle between 1 and 10. In movies, we give a rating, not a grade. So our middle point is the number 5. That means it is average. An equal number of people seeing it would both like it and hate it. That's how I view a 5 out of 10, where it's just right in the middle. You're going to have fans, you're going to have haters, but when you start moving down, you get more people to dislike it, and when you move up, you get more people to like it. So that is our rating scale. When we did Dr. No, I will give a quick reminder. I gave it a 4, you gave it a 6, so averaging out, it was a 5 out of 10, right down the middle, just like we said, totally average. That's,
yeah.
But I am interested. Do you want me to go first, or do you want to go first?
I mean, I'll go first. I don't know that we'll be doing like more than just whole numbers, because
you can do decimals. We're going to
maybe
get
I'll have to start. Yeah, maybe I'll have to start justifying my takes, because like I can come around to the heist part feeling like a solid idea, but the Istanbul is just really hard to parse and understand. A whole side quest that isn't really explained. I mean, it gives Karen Bay a little bit of more depth, but it's not explained depth. Like, he's upset at this other Bulgarian guy, but not to the point of telling you why, which is okay. I mean, it's fine. You do you. So, I mean, it's not as fun, even though Dr. No is kind of quirky. It's not as fun as that one through and through. It's a lot more serious. So I'm going to be moving down from 6 to 5. This one is
interesting.
Average.
That's funny. So the 6th book, you gave a 6. The 5th book, you gave a 5.
5. I didn't even know.
Yeah.
First time.
Now, I had this number in my head coming in. Like, I have not changed my rating since I got done watching it the first time. So my justification for this is that there are bits of fat that could have been cut. We've already mentioned it. There are parts that are clunky and don't work, and I do think Tatiana is among the weakest of the Bond girls that we are going to see in the franchise. She just doesn't really work the same way that other characters do. Even in Dr. No, when our Bond girl was at the very end, she still had more to do and more to say and more to bring to the movie than Tatiana does. So with all of that in mind, those are my 2 things that I really dislike, but I think everything else hits on all cylinders. I really love so much of this movie. I didn't get it for the longest time. And then today, the day of recording, it finally clicked for me, and I have to give it a 7 out of 10. That is
nice.
So again, it's easy math. If we just go between the 2 of us, it's a 6 out of 10. And I think if I were to interpret that, I would say it's fair because, a lot of times sequels have the opportunity to be better. They're not. Many sequels are bad, but every once in a while you get a Godfather Part 2 or a Toy Story 2 or a Paddington 2, and these ones set a bar that says a sequel can be better, and I think From Russia with Love does the same. It's got a lot more that will become Bond that's just kind of set in this movie. And it's just a shame that most of Istanbul could have been cut. There are people who love the Gypsies, and I love the chief of the Gypsies. He has a few lines in I think he's speaking Turkish,
Oh,
is
yeah.
what the subtitles say.
It's something, yeah.
But when he speaks in English, he says, "Thank you, thank you." Or during the brawl, when Bond saves him, he turns around and shouts, "Thank you." And it is so charming that I'm willing to accept all of the gypsy scene just to hear the chief say thank you.
Thank you.
But I still would cut all of that from the movie.
All the rest.
Yeah, but I still think, if I were to show these movies to my kids, I at this point between these two movies, I would start with From Russia with Love. Yeah.
Yeah, if they were just a little bit shorter, I would enjoy them more. I think it is a task to. I mean, if I weren't watching it in order to review, maybe I could turn my brain off a bit more and be like, who cares? I don't know why they need this thing, but they want it. So villains are going to do what they need to do to get it.
Well, and I'm glad you are paying as close attention as you are.
Okay.
Even if you see yourself as not fully invested, I think I feel the same way you felt. The first few times I watched this movie, I was like, this is overrated. I don't know why so many people seem to love this movie. And now I love it too. It happened. It clicked.
See, and I'm also watching these without checking out like Rotten Tomatoes or anything. So I don't know which Bond is the highest rated Bond.
Yeah,
but
I don't know that
maybe
either.
I'll enjoy it when I get there. The journey.
Personally, I don't care, so I'm not going to look these up.
Yeah.
I know their box office returns. I've got that handy because I look at that occasionally to be like, so how did it do? And in this particular case, with a budget of $2 million, they returned $78.9 million. So about $20 million more than Dr. No did. So a pretty good return on investment, I would say.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think now, like if this were a Souls game, this would be when someone puts a tutorial on the floor that says the real Bond starts here.
Yeah, that would make it easier to be like, okay, this is superfluous to the plot. We don't really need to pay attention to a fight, a blood feud between two characters that are not quite fleshed out, as endearing as they are.
Yeah, we need to have a foil for all of our characters. Grant is the foil to Bond, and Krylenko is or Krishenko. I don't even know his name. He is such a useless character that I barely want to know that he exists. But he's the foil to Karen Bay, a horribly underused character who sadly has to be in the movie because of what happened. But let's start doing our closing stuff, because I just looked at our recording time, and even when I do some cuts, we're still looking at like an hour and a half plus.
Yeah.
We now have we have it since you listened to the last episode, but we now have a Gmail. It is Potato Chip Pictures Pod, all one word, @gmail.com. You can also find Potato Chip Pictures on YouTube as well as Blue Sky. We will attempt to get on to more podcatchers in the future, but that's a discussion that my co-host and I are going to have off the air because there's a lot of stuff that goes into making a podcast. But for now, I would ask that you encourage your friends to give us a listen either on YouTube or on Spotify, wherever of those two things, wherever they prefer to listen to podcasts. Do you have anything you want to add for this closing?
Not particularly. It's been fun viewing them. I am looking forward to being maybe a little more horrified at what was put onto the screen in the 1960s.
Oh, dude, it's going to get worse. I am
no.
so glad I have committed you to this because we are in PG-13 territory and you're getting a little uncomfortable, and I'm so happy for that.
Oh boy. I mean, I don't like. I'm trying to recall what I can, but I want to say that I watched most of the Bonds on broadcast TV, so I have no idea what was in the theaters.
There's
It's
a
like
lot of
watching old
stuff that gets
airplane
cut
movies.
for those.
Oh boy. Well, here we go.
Yep, it's going to be
onward
great.
in the journey.
Yes, Bond and Potato Chip Pictures will return in Goldfinger. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching listening, watching if you're on YouTube. I am the Sammy Davis.
I'm Justin.
Goodbye!